So the final scene of Act Two is a fairly short scene. We see Ross, who is another Thane, walking outside the castle with an old man. They discuss the strange and frightening things that have been happening over the past few days, and note that although it's daytime, it's dark outside. Last Tuesday, an owl killed a falcon, and Duncan's beautiful, well-trained horses behaved wildly and ate each other. So it's really looking at the way that the world seems to be topsy-turvy and everything's inside out. Macduff comes out of the castle and tells Ross that Macbeth has been made king and rides to Scone to be crowned. He adds that the Chamberlains seem the most likely murderers and that they may have been paid off by someone to kill Duncan. Suspicion has now fallen on Malcolm and Donalbain, King Duncan's two sons, because they've fled the scene. Macduff returns to his home at Fife, refusing to go to see the coronation, and Ross departs for Scone to make sure that he stays in with Macbeth. Looking more closely at this language, the old man doesn't have a name. And I think this is deliberate in the sense that there is that ambiguity about who he actually is. Remembering obviously that in Christian theology, we look at the old man perhaps as a godlike figure. And so we see him perhaps in this light in this scene. And he talks about that he's never seen a storm so bad or things so out of kilter before in his sort of 40 years that he can remember. And Ross says that he agrees that he has seen some strange things, and he talks about the way that it's dark outside even though it's daytime. And the quote that I think is really important here is the first one that's highlighted in red, where it says, "Yet dark night strangles the travelling lamp." And this idea of darkness sort of overcoming the light is a key motif for the play as a whole. We look at this idea of perhaps the blackness and the evilness and the supernatural is now overtaking that light that was initially inside of Macbeth, and it is surrounding him and his castle in darkness. The man then talks about the unnatural deed that's done. He talks about the fact that nature is being overturned because of this regicide. And he mentions the falcon towering in her pride of place was by a mousing owl hawked at and killed. And we've seen this idea before with the prey overcoming the predator. It was used in Act 1, Scene 2, when the captain was given the report of the battle, and he talked about the sparrow overcoming the eagle, and this idea of somebody moving ahead of their station. And Ross agrees, and he says, even stranger things have happened, that Duncan's horses, who are so beautiful and magnificent, have kind of got out of control, and they've even started eating each other. So this kind of this distilling of evil is beginning to affect the natural world, and things are really unnatural and out of order. Macduff then talks about the idea that Malcolm and Donalbain, the king's two sons, are stolen away and fled, which puts upon them the suspicion of the deed. So the fact that they've gone, at the moment, Macbeth has headed off to be crowned king, and he certainly seems to have his plan working. The alibi, the moving of the suspicion from him and Lady Macbeth onto Malcolm and Donalbain allows us to see at the end of Act 2, seemingly Macbeth having everything that he wants. So perhaps the key point of this scene is the description of the sparrow and the eagle and the hare and the lion and things coming over place that we saw in Act 1, Scene 2, linking into this idea of the falcon towering in her pride of place being overcome, and the description of the prey overcoming the predator, the weaker and less noble overcoming the stronger and rightful head of the hierarchy. It's an allegory of Macbeth overstepping his rightful place and killing Duncan in order to usurp the throne. It has caused an unnatural and imbalanced world where chaos and confusion will reign. And that's the key takeaway from this scene. This is the bit that you need to really think about when you're going back over your notes. So your activities for this slide, going with the draw it, imagine it, write it, analyse it. I think the most important thing is this idea of the storm and the unnatural events that are occurring within nature. So perhaps drawing a picture of the castle in the storm, remembering to include those key quotes about nature being disrupted. Imagine it, as always, how would you direct this scene? Where would you have Ross and the old man in relation to each other? Perhaps again thinking about the staging within a theatre. Would you make use of the heavens, of the balconies, to put the old man on to symbolise perhaps that godlike presence that he brings to the play? You could write it, a great opportunity here to practice those creative writing skills for your language paper. Use this scene, this idea to write a Gothic description. Feature that idea of the natural world being overturned and the pathetic fallacy to really capture that ominous and sinister tone. Or analyse it. In Act 1 and Act 2, we've seen a lot of imagery and a lot of ideas about the disruption to nature. And in particular, we've talked about the bird imagery. So thinking about how does Shakespeare present nature and the natural order in the play, and certainly in these first two acts that we have studied so far.